problem. My argument over there was designed to prove that it is impossible for the United States government to solve the race problem. It's impossible.
Malcolm, on your trip abroad, you said you sensed a feeling of great brotherhood, and that conceivably you would be working toward integration in this country now. At least this is what you're reported to have said. Have you any comment on it?
I don't think that I ever mentioned anything about working toward integration. They haven't even got integration right here in New York City. You have worse integration problems in the North than they have in the South. So if it doesn't work, if you can't bring about integration in New York City as international, cosmopolitan, up-to-date as it's supposed to be, you will never get integration anywhere else in the country.
Are you prepared to work with some of the leaders of the other civil rights organizations?
Certainly, certainly. We will work with any groups, organizations, or leaders in any way, as long as it's genuinely designed to get results.
Does your new beard have any religious significance?
No, not particularly, but I do think that you'll find black people in America, as they strive to throw off the shackles of mental colonialism, will also probably reflect an effort to throw off the shackles of cultural colonialism. And they may begin to reflect desires of their own, with standards of their own.
They discovered America 170 years before Columbus was even born. They were Muslim, they were African, and the proof is sitting in documents Columbus himself wrote before he ever set sail. This is the story of Mansa Abu Bakr II, the African emperor who sailed to America in 1311. First, in 1311, the emperor of the Mali Empire assembled the largest fleet the world had ever seen. 2,000 boats loaded with men, supplies, and months of provisions. Mansa Abu Bakr II was not a man who thought small. He had heard stories from fishermen about a current in the Atlantic that flowed toward land on the other side. So he did what great emperors do. He went to find it. He appointed a successor, handed over his empire, climbed into his boat, and sailed west. He was never seen again. Then, the evidence started surfacing everywhere. Christopher Columbus wrote in his own journal that Native Americans told him black traders had already visited from across the ocean bringing metal spears tipped with a gold alloy identical to what was produced in Mali. Identical. Botanists discovered that a plant called maize, native to the Americas, had been cultivated in West Africa before Columbus arrived. There was no natural way for it to get there. And finally, historians buried it anyway. Because acknowledging that Africans discovered America first doesn't just rewrite history, it dismantles the entire narrative of European superiority that justified slavery, colonization, and 500 years of systemic racism.
Now, American Indians, it don't take 5 gens in to find your people and know the land where they were on that belonged to your family and the land that you're due. I went in 10 gens. That's why I'm so adamant about this shit. You can't tell me I came from another country. But 5 gens in, 200 years, it's not hard. Put the work in. Get it done. They're trying to shut us out. And we're not allowing that anymore. We are the American Indians. No matter what name they have tried to change us to, change our status, change what it is, change goddamn it this, that, and the third, we are still those people. And we are indigenous and aboriginal to this land. Know your status. Get it corrected. Stand in solidarity. I love y'all. I'm so proud of us as a people. We made it.
Buildings. Slavery could never have existed in this country and been maintained without the full participation of the American tribes. That's why they started calling them civilized rock, because they began to say, you quit hunting in the woods and running wild and get yourself some land and get yourself some slaves. So Indians became slave hunters, slave traders, and in the final analysis, all civilized tribes, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Seminole Indians, they all fought with the South to maintain slavery. And so therefore, and they got benefits from it. And that led to, going back to the earlier question you asked me about reparations. And even after the Civil War ended, the Choctaw and Chickasaw was still holding about 12 or 15,000 slaves even after the Civil War ended. The United States government sent in troops saying, you got to get rid of this slavery and set black folk free. And they set up what's called the 1866 Indian Treaties with these 5 civilized tribes, which says that black people in this country must not only turn them loose, they must get benefits. They must get forms of reparations, going back to your earlier question. You must first of all, set them free. 2, you must give them an option, and this is for all black freedmen and all blacks who lived in the Indian Territory and all black Indians. You must set them free, allow them to have membership in the tribe. You must give them, let them have access to all the resources on the reservation. You must let them also be tax exempt. You must let them have free education. You must also let them be able to give them $150 in cash. You must give them 160 acres of land. And in present day times, those black Indians under the 1866 treaty should be getting, they could also hold gambling casinos. Now, this country has never carried out the full mandates, but yet we are still honoring it for Indians. Right now, all the benefits that Indians are getting in this country are getting it from the 1866 Indian Treaty, because they took up arms against the United States in the Civil War. They wiped out all previous treaties. Now, every year in the White House, we get about 567 white Indian chiefs, which in history they call $5 Indians, because 90% of the people call themselves Indians nowadays are not really Indians. Those are whites passing as Indians, because they paid $5 to the Dawes Commission to get their name on the Dawes roll so they can get all these advantages. But every year they get invited to the White House. And every year they got an approximate $3.5 billion every year, even that Obama's been in office. They got money into the Federal Indian Bureau. Now, see, if you were to talk about reparations, black folks have been getting all this money all these years too. But they got shut out because the Indians in 1938, they sent a letter to the Department of Bureau of Indian Affairs saying, how do we shut black folk down to make sure they never get any reparations? And that letter floated around in the federal government from about 1938 to about 1941. Then it went to the Secretary for the Department of Interior. And the Department of Interior looked and says, said, how do I come up with a scheme to shut down blacks so they get no reparations in this country? He said, what you do, you Indians come up with a new concept called a quantum blood law, which says that black folk are not entitled to any of the benefits of the 1866 treaty in terms of reparations unless they can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they got 1/4 Indian blood in them. And we make Indian blood sacred like Jesus Christ's blood. And therefore, they've been shutting blacks out all these years. That's why they didn't get any reparations, to go back to your earlier point. And the last point on reparations, you asked me earlier about a blueprint. This country's always given reparations to all groups except black folk, even though black folk were the ones who built the country. They built the bridges, they picked the cotton, they built the highways, they built the government buildings. They were the backbone of this nation. But now, so in the Marshall Plan, we gave billions of dollars to Germans after World War II. We got under what's called a Point 4 program. We gave reparations to Japanese. We gave reparations to American Indians. We gave reparations to everybody but black folk. Yet black folk are locked into the bottom of a vertical order and a descending order of wealth, owning, and poverty, and control of resources, and nobody wants to address the issue. Because right now, see, in this nation, everything that everybody dreams of is identified with and associated with white skin. That means privilege, wealth, power, income, and privileges associated with white skin. Nobody's right mind will identify with anything black that's negative. If black folk are carrying 6 to 7 times their fair share of everything is bad, why would anybody want to identify with blackness when they can identify with whiteness and get all these advantages? Now, in terms of what they should be doing for that, black folk, for instance, right now, these young black folk that need leadership in these communities, like this thing about Black Lives Matter, they're floundering around because they don't have any black leadership out there. Now, if black leaders will say, well, what can we do to help these blacks, give them some leadership, and at the same time give them some mild form of reparation that's not violent, not committing themselves to violence and then to kind of overthrow or revolutionary activities. They should go in all these urban areas. 70% of all the black people in America live in and around 10 large metropolitan areas. Yeah. Why don't you go in and reindustrialize those areas and build industries in there?
Today, the international community has taken a significant, considerate, and historic step forward by adopting this landmark resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans and the racialized chattel enslavement of Africans as the gravest crime against humanity. With the adoption of this resolution, Resolution A/80/L48, we have not simply passed a text, we have affirmed a truth. We have chosen remembrance over silence, dignity over erasure, and shared humanity over division. We have advanced the cause of justice, and we have done that so emphatically. Those who voted in favor, 123 member states of the United Nations. 52 abstained, and only 3 voted against. This is an emphatic victory for justice. And our ancestors, Africans, and all people of African descent are today honored that our humanity and our dignity have been restored. Let me, on behalf of the African Group, express our profound appreciation to all member states who supported this resolution. We wish to thank those who engaged in its consideration in a spirit of dialogue, reflection, and good faith. We acknowledge that views differed during this process, and we note the positions taken by delegations that were not in a position to support the resolution at this time. The adoption of this text is not an arrival at a destination, but rather a major step in our ongoing journey and collective conversation for reparatory justice. We remain committed to continued engagement with all member states in the shared spirit of cooperation. Yesterday, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Ghana, who initiated this landmark resolution, talked about the importance of language, how it shapes our understanding of the past and our vision for the future. Today, through this resolution, the world has spoken with clarity and truth. We have affirmed that the trafficking of enslaved Africans and their racialized chattel enslavement is the gravest crime against humanity, a crime whose scale, structure, and enduring consequences demand recognition at the highest level of our shared global conscience, so that we can move forward in healing and in preventing such a crime from ever happening again.
Most people know about slavery across the Atlantic, but did you know some boys were enslaved and deliberately mutilated so they could never become men? For over 1,000 years, the trans-Saharan slave trade ran through routes stretching from West and Central Africa to North Africa and the Middle East. Captives were marched in caravans across brutal terrain, heat, thirst, and exhaustion turning the journey itself into a weapon. Many didn't survive the crossing. Those who did were sold into different forms of bondage, domestic labor, agriculture, mining, and military service. But some boys were taken for a specific purpose, castrated and turned into servants for elite households, a process so violent and dangerous that many died from it. This wasn't done to all enslaved males, but it was a real and deliberate part of the system. The records are fragmented, and the numbers are debated, but the impact is clear. Families shattered, communities destabilized, and generations shaped by human trafficking on an imperial scale. It's a reminder that slavery wasn't one event, it was a system, repeated across centuries, in multiple directions.
Ghana's president has been talking for a while about the reparations that are owed when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade. And on Wednesday, yesterday, the UN Assembly got together and they voted on a measure that would call the transatlantic slave trade the greatest crime against humanity. Now, in this measure, it is talking about not only recognizing that the transatlantic slave trade was the greatest atrocity against humanity in history, but it would also call for the return of stolen artifacts from Africa, as well as reparations, even though it doesn't go into details about what those reparations are. Now, the resolution actually passed with 123 votes in favor, but notably, many of the European countries, including the UK and France, abstained. About 52 countries abstained from the vote, and 3 countries actively voted against it. Those 3 countries, you will be very surprised to know, are the United States, Is Not So Real, and Argentina. Interestingly enough, Is Not So Real and the United States are currently locked together in a war with Iran, and Argentina got about $40 billion from the Bone Spurs administration in 2025. But even with that, the measure passed. And like I said, the president of Ghana has been spearheading this whole movement, saying that the trafficking and racial chattel enslavement of Africans is the greatest crime against humanity because of its definitive break in world history, the scale, the duration, the systemic nature, the brutality and enduring consequences that continue to structure the lives of all people. But like I said, many countries, including the U.S., didn't want to sign on to this measure because of the mention of reparations. The U.S. saying that it does not recognize the legal right to reparations for historical wrongs that were not illegal under international law at the time that they occurred. So basically, because chattel slavery at the time was legal and the treatment and the brutality against those people were legal at the time, they shouldn't have to either acknowledge that, recognize that, or pay reparations towards the people who are living with that history that still continues. And the thing about that, and the one reason why many of the other European countries, the countries that had something to do with the transatlantic slave trade, the reason why, especially the United States, if they were to actually recognize that Black Americans specifically deserve reparations for the things that have happened because of the transatlantic slave trade, they wouldn't only have to recognize the transatlantic slave trade. They would have to recognize all of the things that they did to Black Americans when they got here. The 400 years of slavery, buck breaking, breeding farms, medical experiments on Black women that gave us the gynecology that we use today. The using of Black babies as bait for alligators. Using our flesh to bind books and lampshades. Using our hair to stuff pillows and furniture. Having us as the main course during a family picnic, after which taking bodily souvenirs home to display. And not only would they have to address those atrocities during the 400 years of slavery in this country, they would have to address the atrocities that happened afterwards, which is usually where the disconnect lies. A lot of people would love to say that slavery was 400 years ago. First of all, it wasn't. It lasted for 400 years. It wasn't 400 years ago. But even after that, they would have to answer for not giving Black people 40 acres and a mule. They would have to answer for when Black people did go and become mayors and become governors and start their own businesses and their own banks, and they started thriving, why it was that those mayors and governors always found themselves unalived, why those towns always found themselves decimated, why thriving Black towns were always stormed and massacred. They would have to answer for Jim Crow laws. They would have to answer for the strange fruit in those trees. They would have to answer for the burning crosses. They would have to answer for the Black towns underwater, for destroying Black towns to put in highways. They would have to answer for the Emmett Tills. They would have to answer for stealing Black inventions, preventing those Black families from reaping the wealth of their intellect. They would have to answer for segregation, keeping Black people from good education and job opportunities. They would have to answer for redlining, mass incarceration, the CIA pumping narcotics into our neighborhoods, and paying people who look like us to sell those narcotics on our streets. They would have to answer for the continuation of mass incarceration of Black people in this country, especially since the rate of exoneration for those people who are imprisoned is about 7 times more than anyone else. They would have to answer to the school to prison pipeline, where they intentionally target our youth for prisons and not for college. They would have to answer for why the mortality rate of Black women in this country is 2 times higher than the second runner-up. There is a reason why the United States refuses to recognize a legal right to reparations for Black Americans. Because even though the transatlantic slave trade ended, the enslavement of Black Americans took on many forms in many ways over time. The targeting, the systematic targeting of Black people continues to this day. And if Black people were to truly get what they are owed from this country, from the loss and the pain and the generational trauma that has been inflicted, not only on our ancestors generations ago who were forced to forget their names, their languages, and their gods, but today, where your name can lose you a job opportunity, affecting your family's wealth, where over 300,000 Black women are out of work just because of the deletion of DEI, in which Black women were the 7th demographic to even benefit from DEIA policies in the first place. In order for this country to truly atone via reparations to the Black Americans in this country, they would go bankrupt. They could pay every Black American a monthly check for the end of time and still not come close to what is owed to Black people, based on solely the atrocities of the things that they have done to Black people in this country. This is why they don't even want to touch the recognition of reparations for Black Americans. They know what they owe is too much. They will never be able to repay what they have done. And this is why they spend more time erasing the history of the atrocities that they created, rather than trying to put in place measures that would actually begin healing. The U.S. knows what it did and what it continues to do to the Black community and Black Americans in this country. And they know that that is a debt that they could never repay.
Listen, y'all, Trump and MAGA have picked a fight with the wrong people. For those of you who aren't as familiar with Black history, countless individuals were jailed and beaten, and some even died to pass the Civil Rights Acts of the 1960s, including the Voting Rights Act. White folks can't really imagine that because we've always had the right to vote. We've always had folks who look like us in Congress. But we cannot stand idly by as our Black brothers and sisters are politically erased. You know, the white community and the white Christian community in particular in this nation has a shameful track record of fighting against Black progress. We made a whole documentary about it. And regardless of where you stand on reparations as a whole, which I do support, what we can all do is to take the first step towards repair, and that is to stand with our Black brothers and sisters when they're under attack. Because if we truly are one nation under God, as we claim to be, then it's high time we started acting like it.
I ain't never owned no slave. My family didn't own slaves. I wasn't alive when that happened. You wasn't alive when that happened. That was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago. If you've ever said any of that, this video is for you. 104 years after the Tulsa Massacre on Greenwood District, Tulsa, Oklahoma, known as Black Wall Street, they are still fighting to try to get reparations from the people that were affected by this two-day raid of 10,000 white people, military-style attack. Houses were bombed, burnt down, people dead in the street. Nobody went to prison. Nobody was charged for it. Everybody got away with murder, and everybody in that district, that community, lost everything they had. Insurance companies denied their claim. No payback, no equitable reparations, nothing. They just lost. That's it. But the fucking family of Ashley Babbitt got $5 million and nobody blinked a fucking eye. Now, Ashley Babbitt, let's remind everybody, is a domestic terrorist who stormed the Capitol building and was actively breaking through the fucking door where Congress was actively escaping the House chamber, and Secret Service weapon drone was saying, stop, stop, stop. And the same motherfuckers that scream, you should have complied, the same motherfuckers that scream, just listen to the officers, the same motherfuckers that scream, just follow the law, don't have a fucking thing to say when she fucking got a fucking booster shot for her actions that day and hold her up like she's a fucking hero. So you want to know everything wrong with America? This right here pretty much summarizes America in a fucking nutshell. The family of a domestic terrorist, just because she's white and was fighting for white supremacy, is fucking duly compensated for their loss. But non-white families, in this case Black people, a Black community, have still to this day not been compensated. Only 2 living survivors that were physically present when the whole thing went down. Still, no equity. You see, this country refuses to right the wrongs of yesteryear, and that's why we're always fucked tomorrow. We fucking built this country on the back of enslaved people on land that we stole after genociding the indigenous people. And then when slavery was made illegal, the for-profit prison system made sure that slavery would stay alive. And always has, and until something changes, always will. The mythology of white supremacy and the exploitation of marginalized communities is why we are here. And the fact that the survivors and the families of the people that were affected by the Tulsa Massacre still are fighting for any type of recognition and reparation. Meanwhile, that family of Ashley Babbitt sitting fat and happy tells you everything you need to know about these not so fucking great states.
The recent Supreme Court decision in Louisiana versus Calais effectively killed the last remaining provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It was authored by Justice Samuel Alito, but it represents the life's work of Chief Justice John Roberts. The Roberts Court has now gutted the Voting Rights Act on 3 different occasions, and Roberts wrote or joined every one of those opinions. And that's not an accident. Roberts has been trying to kill the Voting Rights Act for more than 40 years, and it looks like he's finally succeeded. Roberts' crusade against the Voting Rights Act dates back to the early 1980s, when he was a young lawyer in Ronald Reagan's Justice Department. The Reagan administration was locked in a fight with Congress over whether to reauthorize parts of the Voting Rights Act and how strong the Voting Rights Act should be. Roberts took the position that the Voting Rights Act should be as weak as possible. Roberts claimed the Voting Rights Act would lead to a quota system in all areas, essentially comparing the law to affirmative action in the voting process. Roberts actually lost that fight in the early 1980s. The Congress overwhelmingly reauthorized and strengthened the Voting Rights Act with strong bipartisan support. But Roberts resurrected his crusade against the Voting Rights Act when he became Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 2005. Roberts claimed in his confirmation hearings that the constitutionality of the Voting Rights Act was a settled question. But once he got on the bench, he quickly got to work in dismantling the country's most important civil rights law. In the 2013 decision, Shelby County versus Holder, Roberts wrote the majority opinion, ruling that states with a long history of discrimination no longer had to approve their voting changes with the federal government. He claimed that things had changed dramatically in the South. But in the wake of his decision, 31 states have passed more than 115 new voter suppression efforts. Roberts claimed in the Shelby County decision that his opinion in no way affected the other major part of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, which banned racial discrimination in voting nationwide. But the Roberts Court quickly started attacking that part of the law as well. In the 2021 case, Brnovich versus DNC, authored by Alito and joined by Roberts, the Roberts Court made it much harder for voters of color to challenge discriminatory voting laws. And then in the recent Louisiana versus Calais decision, the Roberts Court struck down a second majority black congressional district in Louisiana and imperiled majority-minority districts all across the country, leading potentially to the largest drop in black representation since the end of Reconstruction. They have now narrowed Section 2 and the Voting Rights Act overall to the point of irrelevance. The defining cause of Roberts and the Roberts Court has been rolling back the civil rights revolution of the 1960s. And it's clear they're not going to moderate on this issue anytime soon. That's why, if you want to protect civil rights in America, we have to have a new Supreme Court.
Listen up, y'all. Donald Trump is going down. And you know what's going down with him? White European Jesus. Because this image, which has always been false, we know it's false, has been a signal for too long that Jesus, the Christ, belongs to white people. But you know what? Jesus was a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew. We know roughly what his skin looked like. And let me assure you, it wasn't pasty white. Yet we have continued to represent him this way. And it's a slap in the face to our black and brown brothers and sisters all over the globe. And it's time for this image to come down and for this entire white supremacist system to come down right along with it.